Mr. Collea. We are doing a project for our digital history, and our subject is Civil War. Our first question is, what are the top significant battles that the Union won?
What are the top ones that they won?
Yes.
Any particular order?
No.
Obviously, Gettysburg and Vicksburg occurring within 24 hours of each other. Most people would focus right on that as being, a highlight of the war, and most people consider that the turning point of the war. The battles around Richmond, 64 and 65, when Grant pinned up Lee's army in Petersburg and Richmond. There were several series of battles which allowed them to more or less keep the Confederates from escaping and basically starve them out and to some extent bleed them out. So you've got Cold Harbor, you've got the Battle of Wilderness. Those were several significant battles, more because they bled the South than the North more or less won them or didn't win them. They won them because they had more men, you might say. Those come to my mind. And of course, the capture of New Orleans, the city, the port in 1862, the capture of Mobile, I think that was 64. Charleston was pretty much penned in, so they couldn't get ships in and out of there. So the North taking the seaports. A lot of times the war at sea doesn't get the same play that the battles on land do, but they certainly had a significant effect in preventing the South from bringing in supplies.
All right. What was the average age of a Union soldier?
If I had to say, I would say probably 19, maybe 18 even, but probably 19. Some as young as 15 and 16, not counting drummer boys who were young as 10. And you occasionally ran into, particularly in the officer corps, 40 and 50-year-olds, but there weren't as many of those. Pretty rigorous, and some of them just weren't up to living that lifestyle for too long if they were too old. It's also true, by the way, in Vietnam and in World War II. Most of the soldiers that we put in large armies have been on the younger side.
What did the Union soldiers usually carry with them?
Carry with them?
Yes.
A gun, a bayonet if they're an infantry soldier. They had a thing called a haversack, which was sort of like a better word, a pocketbook, and which they would carry food and needles and Bibles, deck of cards, whatever personal items they might want. They also had the haversack was primarily for food. And then they had like a backpack, what you'd call a backpack, which would then carry personal belongings in that, change of clothes, which they might be lucky if they had a pair of socks, an extra pair of underwear, and that's about it. A bedroll that they would have. Most of them would have a canteen. Then they would also carry a small box in which pre-wrapped cartridges, because they're salt paper and they didn't have shells, they put the gunpowder and a bullet into a paper wrap, and they would bite the end off, pour it down the barrel. And then they had to carry a friction primer, a small cap, which would go on the back part of the rifle. Back in the Daniel Boone days, they had to pour gunpowder in the back and the front. Civil War times, you just poured it in the front and put this little cap on the back. So they had a special little pouch for that. So they're wearing all this stuff to the extent that you don't lose it. For example, if you run away from a battle, then you tend to throw these things aside, which the government didn't make you pay to replace, so you didn't want to do that. Obviously, they got a hat and things like that.
How did the North prepare for the war?
In reality, they didn't. Neither side really prepared in the true sense of the word. The standing army at the time the war started might have had 10 or 15,000 men in it. The Navy was not very big at the time of the war started. In fact, when the war started, as you probably know, many Southerners who were at West Point, for example, went south. And that's where the South actually, at the beginning of the war, got the best generals, because so many of them came from West Point. There were what they called militia. Back in those days, going all the way back to the Revolution, the idea of a volunteer soldier who could, at a moment's notice, a minute, be ready to fight, still prevailed. And so a couple times a year they would have Militia Day, usually around the 4th of July was one of them. And the guys in the local unit would march down to the village square, they'd do target shooting and the rest and all this stuff. And it was a picnic, and it was a day of fun and speeches and singing and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't really done with the idea that tomorrow we're going to be in the Battle of Bull Run. They were just doing it because it was a tradition. So nobody was really ready when it started, you might say. The South might have been a little more ready because they knew they were going to do that. The North kind of was hoping they wouldn't.
All right. What were some of the advantages the Union had over the South?
They basically had all the advantages. The only advantage the South had was they had slaves, which are not an advantage in the war itself, but they could use them to build defenses, and they had cotton. Other than that, the North outnumbered the South in population about 3 to 1. white population. The North had factories, say 10 to 1, if probably even greater than that. Railroad mileage, the North outnumbered the South in miles for railroads. Raw materials to make weapons and things like that, the North had access to it. They didn't have it itself. Food grain crops the North had, the South only grew cotton basically. And probably the other one, immigration came in primarily to the North and the South, so there was an abundance of new people coming in all the time. It was all there. The North had an existing government. The South had to start one from scratch, you might say. So you can go on and on and on with that.
What was the average firearm that the Union soldier carried?
Most of them carried a Springfield rifle, which I'm going to guess probably weighed 15 pounds, maybe 10 pounds, maybe not quite that heavy. And a bayonet on the end. Percussion, which means they put the little cap on the end, pulled back, put stuff down the barrel, shot it. They had a revolver. Officers and cavalry had revolvers, Colt or Remington revolvers, 6-shot revolvers. They had swords. Officers and cavalry had swords. As the war went on, there became quite a mixture. If you were to collect Civil War weapons today and you wanted one of each one, you'd have hundreds of them. England, the South bought Enfield rifles from England. The South tried to copy various things that the North made. So there was quite a variety, but the standard issue weapon was a Springfield rifle, a Colt or Remington pistol.
Besides firearms, what were new technologies in the Civil War?
New technologies, obviously the ironclad boat was one. The use of a screw propeller on a boat was something new, which the Monitor had. The use of a gun that resembled a machine gun wasn't quite as effective because it was still in its early stages. A rifle that could fire 9 or 15 shots. There was a Spencer and one called a Henry, and they could cock them and fire bullets that way with a pre-cased bullet was new. They used balloons for aerial observation, which was new. They had a submarine, the South did. Sank a ship, sank itself too, but nevertheless sank a ship. They had mines they put in the water and set off electrically when a boat got near it. They had mines they planted in the ground, land, and set them off when someone walked near it. The list is probably endless in terms of things that were done for the first time. Telegraph was used extensively to monitor troop movements. Railroad, first time troops were moved about from one site to another by railroad, which obviously increases their... If you're the soldier, you really don't want to be carted from one battlefield to another. Thank you very much. I'd rather walk. Maybe we'll get there in time. But they would do that and get double use out of the same men. So, armored railroad cars with cannon mounted on them. Got all day. We can keep going here.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that'll keep it.
Yeah. Thank you.